Sri Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivajikacharya Stota Shata Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai Anantakoti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Dai Gaura Premanande Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Narayanam Namaskritya Naranchaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayet Nasupraya Shirabhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki Krishnaya Vasudevaya Devaki Nandanaya Cha Nanda Gopa Kumaraya Govindaya Namo Namah Hare Krishna. So we're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 7, Text number 16. And the chapter is entitled Further Inquiries by Vidura. Sadva etat vayarhitam vidvan nanatman mayayanam hare apatye apartam nirmulam vishvamulam na yad bhayi sadva eta vahrit. What is it? Okay. So what meter is it? Okay. What is the meter though? Sad. Okay. Sad 8. Oh. Okay. Sadvretat vahritam vidvan nanatmam mayanam hare abhatya apartam nirmulam vishvamulam nayat bahi svevatat vahritam vidvan nanatma mayaya manam hare abhatya apartam nirmulam vishvamulam nayat bahi sarva etat vayarhitam vidvan nanatma mayanam hare abhatya apartam nirmulam vishvamulam nayat bahi. Mataji's? Mataji's? Vidvan Mayamanam Hare Nirmulam. Anyone else? Sadhu, as good as it should be. Etat, all these explanations. Vyarthatam, thus spoken. Vidvan, O learned one. Na, not. Atma, the self. Maya, energy. Ayanam, movement. Hare, of the personality of Godhead. Abhati, appears. Apartam, without meaning. Nirmulam, without basis. Vishvamulam, the origin is the supreme. Na, not. Yat, which. Vai, outside. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. O learned sage, your explanations are very good, as they should be. Disturbances to the conditioned soul have no other basis than the movement of the external energy of the Lord. Purport. A living entity's unlawful desire to become one with the Lord in every respect is the root cause of the entire material manifestation. For otherwise the Lord has no need to create such a manifestation, even for His pastimes. The conditioned soul, under the spell of the external energy of the Lord, falsely suffers many unfortunate incidences in material life. The Lord is the predominator of the external energy Maya, whereas the living entity is the predominated by the same Maya under the material condition. The false attempt of the living entity to occupy the predominating post of the Lord is the cause of his material bondage, and the conditioned soul's attempt to become one with Him is the last snare of Maya. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Gananjana Shalakoya Chakshurun Minitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swam Padantikam Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Nitinamane Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nivishesha Shunyavadi Paschyacha Deshatarine Vansha Kalpatarumbischa Kripa Sindhu Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Mukund Korati Vachalam Pangalangai Tegarim Takripat Naraham Vande Shri Gurum Dinatarimam Agisha Yashavarane Lakshmi Yashya Chavakshashi Yashishte Hridaye Samvit Tam Nishimham Maham Bhaje. When I read this purport last night, I was thinking of a verse which comes in the Prema Vaivarta of Jagadananda Pandit. Srila Prabhupada would quote this verse very often, and often in a very animated way. So the verse is, Krishna bahir moka bhoga vanshakare nikatanastana maya tare japatiya tare. So what this verse is saying is that the living entity, Krishna bahir mukha bhoga vanshakare, that the living entity turns his face away from Krishna and looks towards the external energy. He looks towards the external energy in a mood of bhoga vanshakare, desires to enjoy that external energy. And then what happens as soon as the living entity turns his face from Krishna, nikastana maya tare japati tare. Srila Prabhupada would say this in a very animated way, that Maya is there to catch the living entity. So how does the living entity become caught? Dayato vishayam pumsam kama tesu pajayate sangat sanjayate kaman kamat kroda bijayate. That the living entity contemplates the objects of the senses for the purpose of enjoyment. And this contemplation of the objects of the senses creates an intense burning sensation that the living entity has to enjoy the objects of the senses. And what this does is it drags one into a bodily conception of life. They develop a deha buddhi. They develop an awareness that I am this material body. They develop an abhiman that I am the Purusha, that I am the enjoyer of this material body, and this material body is simply meant for my enjoyment. And Krishna explains in the 16th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita that in this conception of enjoying separately from Krishna, one is entangled in what Krishna says is asha pashas tatar bandha pada. It's and Srila Prabhupada translates this particular Sanskrit as an endless network of hopes. So the living entity is entangled in this endless network of hopes for enjoying separately from Krishna. And they become so bewildered by this that they become completely forgetful that they have anything to do with Krishna or that Krishna even exists. In the most degraded form of this conception of life, Srila Prabhupada, as he's saying here, one develops this Ashura Bhavam Ashata, this Asuric disposition that Krishna doesn't even exist. And if God does exist, I must be Him. This is the conception of a material mentality. And sometimes when we think of like Mayavad philosophy, or we think of impersonalism, because we're so trained in Srila Prabhupada's books, sometimes we think of it as like a caricature, as like something that's like far away from us. And we've given this up a long time ago, and anyone who believes in this, they're just stupid. They're retarded. But Radhika Raman Prabhu, I was listening to a class that he was giving, and he was making the point that we actually don't realize how pervasive Mayavad is in our life. Because the whole idea of this Purusha Abhiman is actually Mayavad philosophy. It's the idea that I am the supreme. And so, on this platform of thinking that I am the supreme, you're functioning in this disposition according to the material body. So what happens on that bodily conception of life? Purusha prakritisto hi bhongte prakritir jangunan kananam gunasango syat sadasad yoni janmasu. According to the objects of the senses that one meditates on, one develops a sangha with those different objects of the senses. And through that association with those objects of the senses, one becomes bewildered in different ways. Icha dvesa samutena davant mohena bharata. Sarva bhutani samoham sagrayanti parantapa. What this verse is saying is that one develops an inclination for a certain set of sense objects according to how they've associated with the world, and one develops an aversion to certain sense objects according to how they've associated with the world. So an example of this is like if I give someone a glubjamin. Having one glubjamin on Balaram Purnima is a very nice thing to do. But if I give you 20 glubjamins and I tell you have to eat it all right there, then what happens is one becomes completely adverse to that sense enjoyment. So this is the nature of our senses interacting with the sense objects. Our mind's enjoyment of those sense objects is in a constant state of accepting and rejecting, sankalpa vikalpa. So it's boga tyaga, boga tyaga, boga tyaga. We're accepting one thing to be a source of our enjoyment, but in due course of time, that very same thing that we accepted as being a source of our enjoyment becomes a source of our misery, and we want to give it up. So this is the bewilderment of the living entity. So existing in this conception of life is a completely miserable state of existence. And this is why the mind is so difficult to control. This is why the whole process of yoga is meant to control the mind, because the living entity, passing through so many different bodies since time immemorial, is completely influenced by this icha dvesha. They're inclined to certain objects from a previous life, and they're adverse to certain objects because of previous life. So for instance, like our mode of conditioning is if I give someone like a bowl of cat food, they're not going to be interested in it. But if I give it to a cat, the cat is going to be very much interested in it. Because their way that they've been conditioned, the way that they accept and reject, is of a different mode of nature. So we're constantly transitioning through these things that we're accepting and we're rejecting, and it's completely miserable. And in the process of doing all this, we don't see, we're not able to see the hand of Krishna in our life because of this Ishvaraham Aham Bhogi, this disposition of thinking that I'm the enjoyer. We're not able to see Krishna's loving hand working in our life. But if one becomes fortunate, then one can gradually come to develop a devotional conception. Actually, Jiva Goswami explains that this material world, it's designed for the sadhaka to realize the sadhya. It's the only purpose for the material world to exist. It's there to facilitate the enjoyment of living entities. It's there to facilitate the liberation of living entities. But Jiva Goswami says in its ultimate truth, in its ultimate conception, it's meant to facilitate the sadhaka's attainment of their sadhya. So what does that mean for us as conditioned souls wandering in the material world? It means that the environment is favorable for us to become Krishna conscious. The only thing that's unfavorable for us becoming Krishna conscious is our disposition of trying to enjoy separately from Krishna. So how does this transformation take place? How does this transformation take place from transitioning from this bhoga vritti to a seva vritti? That means one's disposition goes from seeing everything as something for my exploitation, for my enjoyment, and transitioning to seeing that everything is facilitating my developing love for Krishna. Everything acts as a stimulus for my love of Krishna. So it begins with meeting devotees. There's no other way for someone to come to a higher standard of life except unless they receive the mercy of a Vaishnava. One has to receive a book, one has to get prasadam, one has to see devotees chanting in the street, and one has to have a lot of contact with this over time. This is known as Bhakti Unmukhi Sukriti. And this Bhakti Unmukhi Sukriti, what it does is it creates a fertile field within the heart. You know, for instance, like farmers, they'll go out into fields and they'll throw a ton of seeds. But if you throw seeds on barren land, it's completely useless. Nothing will fructify. So there's Bhakti Unmukhi Sukriti, it creates a fertile soil within our heart by which we can actually begin to cultivate the seed of devotional service. So this is explained by Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. Brahmananda Brahmite Kona Bhagyavan Jeev Guru Krishna Prasade Pai Bhakti Lata Beach. That one receives the seed of devotional service. And what is the seed of devotional service? The seed of devotional service is one acquires the practices and the methods which help cultivate love of Krishna. One receives a sadhana. Krita sadhya bhavat sadhya bhavasa sadhanadibitaha. Nitya sira sabhavasya prakritam hridya sadhyata. That Rupa Goswami explains that sadhana are those activities which bring about love for Krishna. So one comes in contact with the Guru and one meets the external representation of the super soul in the form of the Diksha Guru and the Shiksha Gurus. But Krishna encourages us that if one is actually hearing from the spiritual master properly, Shrinvatam Swakata Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtana. If one is engaging in this Punya Shravana Kirtana, then there should be a transformation that takes place. And what is this transformation? Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita, Yomam pasiti sarvatra sarvam cha mai pasiti tasyaham na pranasyanti sacha me na pranasyati. That when one comes to the highest position of spiritual realization, they go beyond seeing anything in relationship for their material enjoyment. But actually everything acts as a stimulus for their developing love for Krishna. So one hears from the Guru, and one says, I only have one Guru. I only have my Diksha Guru. But as one makes advancement, they begin to collect Shiksha Gurus. And then as one makes more advancement, they begin to see that the people on the streets is also a kind of Guru. And then one begins to see that actually the trees are my gurus, the water is my guru, the ocean is my guru. Everything in existence is facilitating my realization of Krishna. And this is what the environment of Vrindavan is. The environment of Vrindavan is that everything is acting as a positive stimulus to our remembrance of Krishna. There's no sense that I'm superior to anyone, and I see that everyone is superior to me because they're serving Krishna way better than I could possibly ever. So they are my worshipful objects. So this is why you see in the prayers of our previous acharyas, such as Raghunath Das Goswami, he's worshipping the cows of Vrindavan. He's worshipping the peacocks of Vrindavan. He's worshipping the dust of the residents of Vrindavan. He's worshipping the bumblebees that are floating around Krishna when he's playing his flute. Raghunath Das Goswami is worshipping all these residents of Vrindavan because he considers that only by their mercy, only by their speaking good wishes onto me, am I actually able to cultivate a genuine disposition of Vrindavan consciousness. And really this is what the Krishna consciousness movement is meant to do. It's meant to create the land of Vrindavan within everyone's heart. That everywhere we go, we see that Krishna's hands is moving my life, and everything is acting as a stimulus for my remembrance of Krishna. And the more we are fixated in this consciousness, there'll be no question of us ever having to fall down. Because one will have gained the genuine quality of Trinadapi Sunuchena, Tarorapi Sahishnuna, Manina Manadena, Kirtaniya Sadahari. This verse is saying that Amanina Manadena. So one learns to give respect to all and expects no respect for oneself. But really the only way that we can offer respect to all is if we are not expecting any respect for ourselves. Because there's nothing to respect. The devotee feels there's nothing to respect within me. There's not one ounce of good qualities in me. We see in the prayers of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He's praying that if my dear Gurudev, if you examine my heart, you'll find nothing of value. You'll find nothing that's actually worth worshiping and worth commendable. So your mercy is everything in my life. And if you don't give me, he actually uses the word sar, which is the essence. Your mercy is the essence of my life. And if you don't give me your mercy, then I'll simply cry and cry and cry because I'm completely hopeless. So this is the disposition of someone who's developed genuine Krishna consciousness, that they don't feel there's anything to respect in me. But in all the other Vaishnavas and all the other living entities, there's something very worshipable. And that's their service attitude to Krishna. So in order for us to cultivate this disposition of genuine humility, which Sanatana Goswami explains is synonymous with the development of prema. Dhanya means intense humility, overwhelming humility. In order to cultivate this humility, one needs to get the association of genuine sadhus. Because in the association of sadhus, one won't feel themselves to be superior. Anyone that had time to travel with Srila Prabhupada, or anyone that's traveled with their spiritual master or associated with very advanced Vaishnavas, the feeling that you get being with is that you feel very humble. You see their attitude of service, you see their determination of sadhana, and you see where we are. Kvajano yamativa pamana, kvadarapramati bhagpirapyata. Rupa Goswami prays that, where am I? And where are these great souls? And where is this most precious treasure of prema? Although I'm completely unqualified for it, I'm still developing an intense hankering. So this intense hankering is really the essence of our Krishna consciousness movement. And this is how we'll know if we're actually making advancement. Krishna bhakti bhavatamati kriyatam yati katopi labhyate tatarlolyam akimulyam ekalam janmakoti sukritavarna labhyate. If we've actually engaged in sadhu sangha properly, sadhu sange sarva shastre koi, lava mantra sarva sange sarva siddhi hoy, then even a moment's association will be so receptive in just that one moment. Our heart is so open, we're so greedy to love Krishna. We're so greedy to learn on how we can develop a deeper impetus for loving Krishna. We're so eager to see how everything is operating for the purpose of helping me develop love of God. We'll be so greedy for this that just a moment's association with a sadhu will be enough to give us all perfection. And we see this in our Krishna consciousness movement. There's a wonderful letter that was written to Shivaram Maharaj in 1994. He received a letter from just a simple Hungarian girl. And every time I've ever read this letter, and any time I've read this letter in a group of people, I've noted that not only do I start crying, but everyone else in the room starts crying. It's so powerful. And it's the story of is that it's a girl named I think her name was Dora. And she was at a festival, like a festival in Hungary. They have this huge festival at Krishna Valley every year where people from all over the country come. It's like one of the biggest attractions in Hungary. And whether rain or shine, everyone comes. So she, became so swept away in the kirtan and the prasadam and the festival, that she bought a book. She went back home, and Hungary is like a very Orthodox Christian country. So she got the book, and when she received the book, she wasn't sure if she was going to read it, so she just put it on a bookshelf. And later on, her mother found it. And when her mother found it, she started chastising her, like, "What are you doing reading this? You know this is against our religion. What do you think you're doing?" And then her grandmother came, and she took the book, and she also started chastising her. Her grandmother, however, went back to her space and started reading the book. And then her grandmother became like a militant. She got the entire family to start chanting 16 rounds. She started reading the entire Srimad Bhagavatam. She started reading all Srila Prabhupada's books, and she told her mother that Jesus' mission was bona fide, but in its current understanding, it's actually failed to uphold his teachings. But Prabhupada is upholding those teachings. Prabhupada is like the next Jesus, is what she's saying. And then she's reading Srila Prabhupada's book, she's chanting Hare Krishna, and Dora says in her picture that in the letter to Shivaram Maharaj that this granny, she's chanting Hare Krishna and she's crying in front of a picture of Srila Prabhupada, speaking with Srila Prabhupada. And then she says, "Do you remember my grandma when we visited? She came up and she kissed your hand, Maharaj." And she said that I want to go to Budapest in order to see God at least one time in my life. So that eagerness, we can understand the mercy that Srila Prabhupada is giving. That Srila Prabhupada is such a magnanimous, elevated Sainipani Bhakta of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. That simply by a moment's association with him, if someone has an iota of sincerity, then that mercy can enter in their heart and completely transform them. Anyone that's distributed books for some time, they have experiences like this. I myself, I experienced distributing books in East Los Angeles. I was going to shop about 4 years ago with Bhakta Devan actually. And we were going shop to shop, and we entered in this like furniture store. And when we entered into the furniture store, this man was there, and as soon as we walked in, he paid obeisances to us. And we were like completely shocked. And so we go up to him, and he said, and I show him the Bhagavad Gita, and he takes the Bhagavad Gita, and there's a picture of Prabhupada in the back, and he takes it. He sees, "You see this man, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada? This is my friend. He is my friend." And he says, "This man, he comes to me every single night, and he says, 'Don't forget the living force, Mario. Don't forget the living force.'" It's like, what is the extent of Srila Prabhupada's mercy? So, in our own Krishna consciousness, it's not that sadhus aren't available. The whole material manifestation is there to facilitate the sadhaka's attainment of his sadhya. So sadhus are available, gurus are available, the holy name is available, everything is available. But Raghunath Das Goswami explains in Manashiksha that the only thing that's preventing us from taking full advantage of this is this damba, this pride. So Raghunath Das Goswami says at the very beginning of Manashiksha, damba hitva, kick out this pride. Kick out this pride that is preventing you from appreciating the mercy of the Vaishnavas, that is preventing you from appreciating the Guru, that is preventing you from appreciating the land of Vrindavan and the Vrajvasis. Kick out this pride and develop intense, unprecedented attachment for these things. This is the instruction of the mind. So this may take some time and this may take some practice, but this is really the only here. In all of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna gives lots of instructions which facilitate Arjuna in different ways. He gives him different options. Like in the 12th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, always think of me. If you can't do that, follow regulative process. And if you can't do that, then just work for me. He gives him various ways in which he can become Krishna conscious. But when it comes to controlling the mind, Krishna is very adamant. And there's one instruction that he gives. Asamsayam. What's that? No. I memorized it last night, but see. 6th chapter. Samsayam Mahabaho Manu Durgin Jaham Chalam Abasyena Tukaunteya Vairagena Chagriyate.